Hello there. My name is Brian Cheatham with Get Cloud Savvy. I don't know about you, but I am constantly trying to find out where to configure features and settings in Microsoft 365. There are dozens of admin portals and thousands of settings to configure. And don't even get me started on the constant movement of these settings when Microsoft changes their interfaces. So I'm on a quest for knowledge to figure out where the most common Microsoft 365 settings are configured. And guess what? I'm bringing you along for the ride. I've started a YouTube series called Where Do I Do That? In this series, I'll show you where to configure different settings and, most importantly, what the expected end-user experience will be. So let's get to it. So next up in this video series, where do I do that? Windows Autopilot deployment. A walkthrough of not just what it takes to configure Windows Autopilot as an administrator, but what is the expected end-user experience? Let's start with an overview of Windows Autopilot. In its most basic terms, Windows Autopilot provides a self-service way for end users to sign in to new or existing Windows devices for the first time. Windows devices are shipped directly to the end user. These Windows devices are associated with a Microsoft 365 tenant, and we use what's called device IDs to make this association. So either the manufacturer or distributor can upload those device IDs, or we can harvest those as IT. This provides a quick path for users to have a business-ready and secure device with little or any involvement from IT. IT doesn't have to maintain OS images, updates, Windows drivers. The Windows image is actually transformed using Windows Autopilot. So let's take a look at the agenda for today's walkthrough. So first, how do you build a lab environment? How do you build a lab environment that will allow you to do what we're fixing to demonstrate? Where do you configure Windows Autopilot? So as an administrator, where do you go to configure? So where do I do that? How do you register clients for Autopilot? So we'll go through the manual process here. What is the expected end-user experience? So what will the user see during that Windows Autopilot experience? So let's take a look at the lab environment. So what you need in order to do this demo. You need a Microsoft 365 business tenant. For this demonstration, we used the Microsoft Customer Digital Experiences, or CDX. You can also use a business premium trial, and you can extend that, I think, from 30 days to 60 days. So you've got a little bit to play with there. But for this demo, we use CDX because we're a Microsoft partner, and we get that demo environment for free. The next thing that you want to have in that tenant is you want to have business premium licensing. Yes, you could do it with something else. You could do add-on licenses. You could do ad hoc licenses, whatever you want to call it. But let's just go ahead and say we're going to do Microsoft 365 Business Premium. The second thing you'll need is a Windows 11 Pro workstation. Really, it could be Windows 10 Pro as well. So in this particular environment, we're using Hyper-V. It's a Hyper-V virtual machine, and it's running Windows Pro workstation or Windows 11 Pro. So the reason that we need a virtual machine and we need Hyper-V is we need to be able to interact with the out-of-box experience. So typically that's referred to as the blue screen at the start, installation process of Windows. We need to be able to see that. And with an RDP session right now, we can't see those type of things. So that's why we're using Hyper-V for this particular demo. So let's look at configuring Windows Autopilot. So we're going to launch our 365 demo tenant. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a group. So it's an Azure AD group, and this will be used for assigning devices to Windows Autopilot. So I'm going to go into the Administrative Center here. Scroll down. I want to go into Identity. And then under Identity, I expand Groups, All Groups, and we're just going to create a new group here. And we want to call this group something meaningful. So in this case, have it already typed out to save me from making an error. So mem, meaning Microsoft Endpoint Manager _ Autopilot AAD join. Okay, and we'll tell you what we're doing with that here in a minute. And then a description. We always want to give this a description, so I already have this typed out. So devices in this group are assigned to the Windows Autopilot Azure AD join deployment profile, which we're going to create in just a second here. So let's create this group, and we'll give that a second to bake in the background. And while that's baking, let's go in and find where we need to configure Windows Autopilot. It's not under Azure AD. We want to go to the Admin Center, Endpoint Manager. Still referred to Intune sometimes, but it's Endpoint Manager. That's where we want to be. And then under Devices, we scroll down to Device Enrollment and then Enroll Devices. So at the bottom here, we have Windows Autopilot Deployment Program, and we want to create a deployment profile. So you have to create a deployment profile before you can use Windows Autopilot. So we're going to create a new profile, Windows PC, and give the profile a name that's meaningful. This is going to be an Autopilot profile where we automatically have the device added to Azure AD, what we call an Azure AD join. And then we'll give it a description. And I could, if I wanted, convert all target devices to Autopilot. I could actually do that for existing devices. I'm going to skip that for now. It's the default is set to no. So we'll come back and talk about that maybe at another time. And let's fix my little typo here. As you can tell, I'm trying to copy and paste as much as possible to avoid the mistake on the video. And now we can go through the different options that we have for this deployment profile. So this is what we call the out-of-box experience, UBI. They also call it UBI. So for deployment mode, we want it to be user-driven. Devices are associated with the user enrolling the device, and user credentials are required to provision the device. Okay, so it's a user that's driving the process. And then our join type, we want to be Azure AD join. So the user, get this, the user is joining the device or has the permission to join the device through Autopilot to Azure AD. The IT administrator doesn't have to do that. And everything else we can see here, we kind of want to take out of view of the end user. So we're going to hide the software license terms. So think of all of those screens that you see during that first experience, that experience when you open a computer up for the first time and you turn it on. It's asking you about privacy settings, licensing terms, if you want to configure a keyboard and all that kind of stuff. So this is what we're doing here. We're setting those options, and we're hiding a good number of them. Notice here, if I go to user account type, I can actually make this a standard user. So yes, we are adding a machine to Azure AD as the user, but only making the user a standard user on the machine. So they do not have local admin rights to the machine. The last thing that we're going to change down here is going to be the device name template. And so what we can do here is we can actually configure the device name and give a variable within that device name. For purposes of this demo, we can have a randomized 4 characters randomized. So get Cloud Savvy win dash the 4 characters randomized for us. We can click next. Now, for assignments, we want to click Add Groups, and we want to select the group that we created earlier. So this mem Autopilot AAD join. So this name probably makes a little bit more sense to you now. So make sure that we select that, and then we're going to say Next. And then finally, we can review the summary of all of our settings, and we will click Create. So now that we have the Windows Autopilot deployment profile created, let's move over to the workstation. So let's start by opening up Hyper-V. And we're going to connect to our workstation. Make this a full screen so we got a little bit more real estate there to work with. Okay, so now we're looking at the out-of-box experience, or UBI experience for Windows 11. So there's this nifty little shortcut that we can use now for diagnostics, and we can export the hardware hash from this particular device to a CSV file as part of those diagnostics. So if I hit Control-Shift-D, that's going to take me to a page that looks like this. I can export the logs. And normally what I would do here is this would be a physical device. I would have a USB stick or something like that that I could plug into the device to where I could export the logs. In this case, we're just going to use a network drive or network mapping back to the host. So let's cross our fingers and hope that this works. Okay, so that's good. At least we got through to the host machine there. So type in our credentials here. Okay, and there's our shared folder. And this is a folder I want to say select folder. So that's going to export my logs to where I have the CSV file that I need to import into the Autopilot configuration. So let's go back to the Microsoft 365 tenant. All right, so now that we have the CSV file that has our hardware hash or our device ID for the Windows 11 client, we need to import it into the admin center here. So first, we need to find the export that was actually sent from the previous process to our host computer here. So if you had a USB drive, this would be the name of the report. The output that comes from that export diagnostics. So it's mdm diag report.zip. So I'm going to extract this. Just going to extract it locally here. And within this diagnostics report, if I scroll down, you can see that I have the device hash. So I can import this directly into my Microsoft 365 tenant or endpoint manager. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to be in endpoint manager again. We'll go to devices, device enrollment, remember enroll devices. And then under enroll devices, we're going to select devices over here under Windows Autopilot deployment program. So we configured our deployment profile, but now we need to import a device. So we've got this little import button here at the top. We'll import. We're going to select our file. There's our file. It's the device hash from that desktop, that Windows 11 desktop. Say import. And now this process will take probably around 5 minutes. Sometimes it can take 10 minutes, and it actually tells you at the top here. So we'll just refresh, and we'll be back in a few minutes whenever that actually shows up. So now we can see that our device is imported into Windows Autopilot. So what I want to do right now is just kind of take a quick step back, and I want to show you what this device looks like in Azure AD. Because we're going to take this device and we're going to add it to our group that we created at the beginning of this video. So we're going to go back here to our admin center. We're going to open up identity. And then we'll select or expand devices and say all devices. And you'll notice here we have this different kind of icon, this little purple icon here. So that means this is a Windows Autopilot device. So if I click on the serial number, right, this is a device ID, click on the serial number, it will tell me this is a Windows Autopilot device. So it can't be deleted from here. So just know that there is an object that gets created that will eventually be converted to a regular computer object. But for purposes of this demo and where we're at in the demo right now, I wanted to show you what this looks like in Azure AD. So now what we want to do is we want to add this to a group. So I'm just going to go over here to groups, say all groups, go down to my MIM Autopilot AAD join, members, and then I'm going to add members, and I want to select that serial number. Make sure that if you're doing multiple, we make sure we have the right serial number. So this is the serial number that I want. So I'm going to add this particular Windows Autopilot device to this group. So this will take a few minutes to refresh. So now what we'll do, we're going to go back to the workstation and we're going to see what the expected end user experience will be. Okay, let's take a look at the end user experience. So we're going to switch back over to our Hyper-V workstation or our Hyper-V virtual machine. I'm going to make this full screen. And you'll notice that we have a sign-in here. So the first thing we see as part of the out-of-box experience is we see a sign-in. And remember the company branding that we did in a previous video? If you haven't seen that video yet, you can go check that out. We did company branding, so this is actually branded. And this company branding is required if you show certain screens during this process. So let's sign in as a user. On Microsoft.com. We'll say next. It's asking us for a password for Alex. Remember, this is authenticating against the Microsoft 365 tenant or Azure AD. And you'll notice here that even as part of this experience, if I didn't have MFA registered, it would ask me to register at this point. But since I have MFA registered, Alex already has MFA registered, it's asking him to provide multi-factor. So let's provide multi-factor with our number matching. And next we'll move into the Windows Hello configuration for Alex on this local machine. So visualize this being a physical machine, and that's where he can set up biometrics, face scan. In this case, we're just going to do a PIN. So now we're going to configure Windows Hello. Just going to set a new PIN. Remember, these pins that you set, they're only for this device. So they can only be used on this particular device. Okay, we're all set. Let's click OK. And now you'll notice how the device comes up and it's already on the desktop. So in the background, what Autopilot is doing is it's doing a handoff. It's adding the machine to Azure AD, and then it's handing off to Endpoint Manager or Intune to apply configuration policies and to install applications. So what I want to do at this point is make a note of the time here that we signed in. So we see a desktop at 1:37 p.m. So we want to time and see how long it takes before we actually have a usable desktop here. And this is an end user, remember, this is coming from an end user's perspective. I'm logging in as an end user. There is no administrative intervention whatsoever here in this process. This is all self-service. So about 5 minutes later, it's now 1:42, we see that we have all of the Office applications installed. So these are Microsoft 365 apps that get installed as part of your Microsoft 365 Business Premium licensing. Okay. So the other thing that's nice here is that if I go into Edge, I can actually bypass this wizard, but I'm already configured in the background for sign in to 365 apps. If I simply click the sign in here, it's going to automatically sign me in the background because this device is joined to Azure AD now. I can also go in and open up Word, and Office will automatically sign in for me as well. You can also bypass this particular screen in Office. So we don't have everything configured completely in Intune yet, but you kind of get the idea, right? Just with these few configuration settings, with Autopilot handing off to Intune, we have a user up and running in less than 30 minutes. And we also configured their OneDrive sync client. So if I open up OneDrive, looks like it closed some reason there on me. We can see now that all of the icons, the cloud icons, meaning that OneDrive is actually syncing. So we have the silent configuration running as well. So this user can actually start working. So this concludes our Windows Autopilot demo, and you got to see the end user experience as well.